Hello. Yeah. So thank you for joining us to the second part on this space session, science session on space. On the first part, it was focused on the legal dimension on the space offers in the Arctic. Now we will move our focus more on stakeholders and how to frame governance and identify what is at stakes when it comes to space in the Arctic region. So we will start right away with our first speakers, James Francis from European Space Policies Institute in Vienna, Austria. He will talk about above the Northern Lights space as a pillar of Nordic security and defense. So, James, please, your floor is yours. And when you will reach 8 minutes. There is 2 minutes remaining. So, yeah, please.
Is it through this that I can move forward on the presentation? There it is.
No.
Okay. If I ask stupid questions, it's because I don't know how to use all these things just yet. But it's nice to see you all. My name is James, and I work at the European Space Policy Institute. We're a policy institute based in Vienna that supports promoting space for different policy domains. So space across different domains, from security and defense to green and sustainable societies, to industry, workforce and finance, as well as exploration and science as well. But I will be here to present a bit more of the research that we conducted on a study about space for security and defense, mainly looking at the Nordic countries. So first, to preface, the reason we picked the Nordic countries is because it's important for, at least for where we are in the Arctic now, to understand a bit more what the main countries in Europe in the Arctic are really looking at and what their priorities are, because that informs thereafter their activities in the region. Great. So this is a bit of a project overview on the project. So it's mainly identifying the policy objectives of the Nordic countries in relation to space for security and defense, as well as understanding their capabilities and their industrial landscape to better inform how they will go about these activities or how they will go about actually furthering their objectives. And we focus on the main 5 countries below. I don't know if I'm blocking a little bit. Maybe I can stand here. Across the 5 main countries, but Iceland is a little bit on the lower side when it comes to space, but that doesn't matter because there's still a lot that they can actually provide in different kind of aspects. And we're looking to publish a report by the end of Q2 or the Q3. So what's important to first look at is what are actually the priorities between all 3 of them. Oh, you can't see Denmark. So they mainly all have very different policy priorities, and that's actually very important for the way that we understand what they want to engage with. Across all 4 of them, you can see that there's actually a convergence between the civil and military domains, mainly looking to further leverage commercial activities, which is something that the region is very strong in. But they then start to differ when it comes to specific niches, such as Norway, which tends to focus a bit more on the maritime, and looking a bit also at access to space through Andøya and PNT. Whereas other countries such as Sweden and Finland, particularly Finland, put a lot more emphasis on SSA, and Finland on space weather and these kinds of activities. Some convergences include, for instance, S-range and Andøya between Sweden and Norway, looking at access to space, and some also look more at the concept of SATCOM and Earth observation being main kind of capabilities that are needed going forward. So what are the main kinds of, common themes that they have between them? The first one is mainly the Arctic, and that's why we're here today to discuss this topic. All 4 of them have expressed that the Arctic is a region of importance. Norway, of course, as we've spoken about a lot today, I think everybody's quite well versed on that. But for Denmark as well, given Greenland, and as well it's a better idea for monitoring the region. And for Finland and Sweden, it's also because of their higher latitudes and the way that they can support through ground infrastructure and different kinds of commercial activities that they engage with in the region. Then we also have space to support the value chain and total defense, so more the concept of how space can be roped in as more of a civilian kind of activity, maybe in principle in the beginning, but actually rope it in more into sort of concepts of regional and national defense. The integration of commercial systems, and sadly I actually wrote the same thing twice, so we're going to skip over that. What does the actual Nordic landscape look like for the moment. We've done some preliminary research, so this might change, by the time we publish the report, but here are some preliminary findings. Of 97 companies that we analyzed, a large percentage actually do security and defense, but they're very split on different kinds of activities they do. The Nordic countries are very strong on downstream applications solely, so being the extrapolation of data from satellites and space assets. But there is still a very strong leaning towards upstream or upstream and downstream. Some do a bit of both, such as ICEYE and other actors in the region. But as you can see here, this is what's more interesting, is to show the breakdown of what sectors or what kind of provisions they mainly give. So a company can fall into multiple categories here, but as we can see in the Nordic countries, it tends to be subsystems and payloads that are very, very strong, meaning they manufacture, small kind of subsystems that will support maybe a satellite, such as a spectrometer or a camera and such. I mean, these are purely examples, but it doesn't come as much of a surprise that 26% are ground operations, given, as I said before, the high latitudes of the region and their ground infrastructure, which also includes the spaceports that are being developed, as well as their infrastructure on Svalbard in the north of Sweden, in the north of Finland, that support SSA, as well as satellite operations. And then down here is a bit of a breakdown about each country. Some are a bit more obvious perhaps than others, such as data services and analytics being quite strong across the board, because there's a lot of software engineering, a lot of engineering being pushed a lot in universities and how to use this data for other applications. But some, for instance, Sweden having a spacecraft integrator as the third largest is not a shock, considering they have very traditional space actors like OHB Sweden or Beyond Gravity that are based in the country. So this gives a bit of a better layout of what kind of activities are going on. And then if you break them down even further into what kind of actual involvement they have in security and defense, it shows that there is actually quite a lot that could still be further leveraged from companies that exist in the region. So we looked at really mainly at their websites, but also at press releases and also other kinds of agreements that they'd made, either MOUs or contracts, to actually determine whether they are involved in security and defense. It comes not much of a surprise, I guess, that Finland has a strong S&D presence through a lot of companies such as ICEYE and new actors on the scene trying to develop a bit more these competencies. For Denmark, it's very low because they have a very brand new space sector with about almost 40% of companies being developed and established in the last 5 to 10 years, and that are very low TRL levels, around 4 or 5. They're really just sort of moving beyond proof of concept. And actually, Sweden is the one that has the strongest one, again, from legacy actors, but Norway also has a pretty equal split between both. But it shows that there's actually, well, behind me, you can't really see very well, but there's a lot that are actually not involved, which means there is a huge amount of space assets and companies that are not being fully leveraged if needed for security in the region or for the benefit of national security and other kinds of activities that range from search and rescue as well to climate security and as well as traditional, perhaps, defense. And then if you look a bit more closely at contracts or agreements and MOUs, there's actually 4 companies that emerge as the main actors in the region. This will probably change a bit more as we get more data as we're finalizing the study. But it doesn't come as a surprise as ICEYE is number 1. They have 1/3 of all the contracts, mainly stemming from now their recent developments of signing with the Swedish Armed Forces, Finnish Armed Forces in Poland and so on for the development of Earth observation capabilities, which have become quite a mainstay now of European space policy direction and the direction of most militaries in order to get a better understanding of what's going on the ground. But then we see actually GomSpace, which pops up as number 1, but that comes mainly from their strong links with Unseen Labs. They sell a lot of satellites to them. So you could essentially, if you removed the concept of, for instance, renewals of contracts and new contracts with the same partners, they'd be much smaller. So they're very dependent on one specific contractor. And then if you look at Ovzon, they have a bit of a similar one where they're renewed a lot with the Swedish Defense Procurement Agency, or with their activities that are mainly through European initiatives. And finally, Kongsberg is quite active on it as well, when having just taken a stake in nanoavionics in Lithuania, but as well a KSAT through their activities for security in Norway and for space operations for the state. So it shows that there's still like quite a big monopoly in these companies. But if we looked before, there's quite a very big environment that could still be further leveraged. I think I'm getting closer to the end now. I think the last part is just discussing the concept of capabilities. These photos shouldn't shock anyone. I think there's probably more Norwegians than Swedes in here, so the Swedes probably aren't that worried. But the concept of spaceports and what that means for capabilities, given now that, as we see, the United States and other larger spacefaring nations are engaging a bit more in independent practices, Europe is looking more towards access to space, and that comes through spaceports. With projected launches in Guyana, which is where actually the EU currently launches a lot of its, the majority of its payloads independently, they are looking towards 8 launches for this year and probably the same amount next year, which is tiny compared to the hundreds for the United States and even for China, which is quadruple, even more than what Europe is doing. So now companies are going to look to expand into other ones. But then the question will be, how will these two interact with each other? If the EU wants to do a launch, will they do it from Andøya instead of a member state? If with Andøya instead of Esrange, for instance, which is a member state of the EU, but if Esrange wants to launch, what are the legal implications of launching over Norway? Because once you launch, it goes over Norwegian airspace. These kinds of questions are going to become more prevalent. And as the region tries to secure a bit more its Arctic capabilities and what it wants to do in the region, there's going to be a greater need for dialogue and more cooperation in between these kinds of actors. So this is maybe something we can discuss a bit later. There's a lot more to talk about, but if you have any questions, feel free to later on to ask me. But thank you.
Yeah. So thank you. So we can now move to the next speakers with Indrapal Gurjar, from PhD researcher from the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, India. Yeah. Indrapal, please. The floor is yours.
So hello everyone. I'm doing my PhD in Arctic Studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University. It is situated in New Delhi, and my PhD topic is Comparative Study of Arctic Strategy of Russia and European Union from 2008 to 2025. And I am looking to write a paper on this topic. That's why I thought I should present this here. So my topic is the new high ground, Arctic space capabilities as a tool of diplomatic leverage and deterrences. So this is my topic. So now I have to explain to you what high ground has been historically. So this is the ancient high ground. High ground means where you get the kind of advantage on your enemies. So in the ancient time, you had your castles. In India, we have our forts. In modern time, at which we can do observe, protection and control could be there. Then there is in modern times, which is the modern militaries, which the blue sea navy, or which could be projected anywhere in the world, like United States that have one. So this is the projection maneuver and dominance. And now this is the future, which will be information, persistent and sovereignty. So this is the important thing, which those who will be controlling the space capabilities in the Arctic would be controlling the Arctic in the future. So now, why space capabilities are important in the Arctic? So as you know that Arctic is a vast region. There are not many people living in this region. It's a empty land, and at some times there could be 6 months night, 6 months day. So for that we need a space capability. So Arctic is a very an important region. So it has 30% of the world oil, 30% of gas, and it's a geostrategic flashpoint also, because it is located between the key actors, which are Russia and European Union, and China is also kind of coming up in the Arctic when it is saying it's in new policy papers that we are the near Arctic state. And the core problem, why we need a space capability in the Arctic, it's a vastness, remoteness, and extreme condition makes a traditional monitoring impossible in the Arctic. And the sheer scale which Arctic have, so that's why that space capabilities will be required in the Arctic. So these three kind of capabilities which are generally developed by the Arctic state till now. So there are domain awareness. So there is a imaging, radar, and signal intelligence satellites which are launched by the many countries, particularly who are US and Russia. These people are, and then there is a communication and positioning, navigation, and timing things, which is GPS, Galileo, which is it of the European Union, and this is GLONASS and satellite communication, which has been going on in the Arctic, and missile warning and trailing. Missile warning and tracking satellites has been also been put up in the Arctic. So these are the kind of three capabilities which has been developed by the Arctic states right now. Now, now we look at how this space technology, which is there, could be used as a tool of diplomacy. So, as I am saying, it's a space capability. So, these satellites, radar, sensors would be collecting the data in the space, and this data could be shared between the alliances. Like European Union can share that data between themselves. European Union and United States and Canada can share that data in between themselves. So how it will work? If these people will be sharing this data, then they will be gaining the kind of influence on each other, like giving the exact location of the things, exact timing, which tanker is passing or which things are happening in this vast and remote region. And if they are withholding the data, they are kind of applying a deterrence or applying pressure. So sharing for the influence, which can happen, like provide high quality. This is just an example which I am putting it up in my paper. So they could be providing ice charting or ship trapping data to allies or non-aligned state, build dependence and strength, and partnership, like commercial partner. They can share data with the commercial partners also. And they could withhold the data for the pressure also. Denying us access to private navigation or environmental data can hinder other state development, which is happening in the Arctic, which is kind of going on in the Arctic for the Russia and European Union and this thing. And this could be another example, a nation offering its superior satellite-based search and rescue coordination as the public good to gain kind of moral authority and diplomatic favor here. So this is how deterrence will be applied by these data, which will be collected through the space capabilities. So by two ways this deterrence can happen. There are two ways. First is deterrence by denial. So they would be demonstrating the capability to track every surface vessel and aircraft, make surprise attack or covert deployment, which could happen in the covert deployment nearly impossible, and deterring aggression. Like there are a lot of aggression which is going on in the Arctic, which could be through which data this could be deterred in the Arctic. And there is another kind of deterrence which can happen in the Arctic through these satellite capabilities, deterrence by the punishment. So investing in the counter space capabilities like jamming, cyber signal, that ability to blind an adversary Arctic operation if hostilities begin. So if there is a hostility kind of going on, then it could be deterred. And there is a message which alliance, the state which are controlling the space capabilities can say, we see everything you do here, and we can disrupt your command of it. So that's how, through space capabilities, deterrence can happen. And so there is now I'll be talking about the competitive landscape which is happening in the Arctic. So there is the Russia, which is again modernizing its Soviet era bases and putting new satellites, new technology, and more money into the Arctic. Then there is the USA, NATO, and European Union, who are making new investment like Space Force Focus and sharing data through NORAD and NATO alliances. Then there is a new actor which is coming up in the Arctic, which is China, which is saying it's in new policy paper, like we are the near Arctic state, and we also want a chair on that table, which will be discussing the Arctic in the future and the kind of development which will be happening in the Arctic. So there are through these space capabilities, there are come challenges and risk also, like militarization of space will lead to the anti-satellite tests, which will create debris in the space, which will be threaten all space assets in the space, and the deterrence dilemma, which is coming from the Cold War, like which capability should be developed and how much capability should be developed in the Arctic, which will be leading to the second risk and capability, and it can lead to the kind of space race which will happen in the Arctic. And the second another thing is the vulnerability, like what we are depending upon here on the critical dependence on fragile domain, that is a space itself. So this is the conclusion, which I'll say the kind of paradigm shift is happening in the Arctic right now. So in 21st century Arctic, those people will have the information superiority will be the people who will be the country or the people who will be controlling the Arctic space, Arctic as an area. And those with those information, with those kind of ice and nervous system will be coming, the state can live their sovereignty, and they say that this is land is mine, this natural resources are mine. So through this space capabilities, sovereignty could be sustained in the Arctic. Thank you.
So we move to our third speaker. So Marco Grasso from COSAT, and his talk on the responsible space operations for Arctic surveillance, lessons from Norway's AOSP satellites development. So,
just a little correction. I work for Kongsberg Defence
Kongsberg,
Aerospace,
okay.
which is a little different than KSAT, still in the same framework. But yeah, so hello everyone. I am Marco Grasso, and I work as a space systems and space mission analysis engineer for Kongsberg Defence and Aerospace. And today I would like to share with you a few lessons we learned through the development of the AOSP mission, which is a satellite mission that is fully developed by KDA, Kongsberg Defence and Aerospace in Norway. And in a way it's relevant for the context of this conference because it is about Arctic surveillance through maritime surveillance in particular. And also we try to think about sustainability when we are developing this mission. I want to start with something that is probably very, well, no, sorry. Does this work? Okay, I think. All right. Yeah, so these very pretty dense clouds of dots are basically the current amount of satellites orbiting the Earth, and especially as we see, there are a lot of satellites orbiting in low Earth orbit, which is becoming more and more fragile and congested environment, to the point that researchers are calling it and referring it as a orbital house of cards that is prone to a disaster. Very scary and a little worrisome. Latest research showed that if we lose access and control to spacecraft maneuverability and controllability for less than 3 days, there might be a catastrophe because a propagation and a cascade effect of one collision, fragments, more collisions, more fragments. And that means that we lose access to space for generations. That means access to all the space infrastructure that we are so heavily dependent and rely on. And so it's something that we really have to think about and care about. And this is another representation just to show that a collision between an active and inactive satellite, and this actually happens, creates thousands, hundreds of thousands of tiny little fragments, millimetric fragments, but because they are very fast orbital speeds, so very high kinetic energy, they can destroy or degrade performance of satellites, even big satellites, as it happens very often. It is estimated that we have a conjunction warning every 22 seconds in a low Earth orbit, and Starlink satellites perform about 40, 50 maneuvers per year. That means that the system is in a very fragile balance that works until we have maneuverability and control. But if we engineers know that the devils is in the edge cases, so things that you cannot control and expect, like for example a solar flares or other major disruption of satellites services. So responsibility and sustainability. I think it's important also to define terms. Space debris mitigation experts identified 4 pillars for preventing, in a way, or reducing the effects of space debris. First and most important, we need to prevent new debris, and this is something we have control on. So through design and operation measures, we can limit the probability of fragmentation, for example, or collisions. But also we should be able to detect more and more objects, to track them better, and also remove existing objects in a way. But when we think and design satellite missions, we should really focus also on the end of life of the mission, and not only during the nominal phases. So planning of end of life operations, like for example, passivation of all the energy sources that might lead to accidental breakup of the spacecraft, capability of disposal, so to make the spacecraft re-enter in the atmosphere and burn up, but also when it burns up, are these materials polluting the atmosphere? So these are important questions to ask. And last but not least, to reduce the impact on radio frequency from Earth because of the brightness of the spacecraft, but also communication in the radio frequencies. So again, space debris mitigation experts, especially ESA, in a way formalized all these kind of thoughts and guidelines in a set of standards and requirements for zero debris. It's a commitment to have zero debris by 2030. And these requirements map directly into practical actions that we engineers have to take into account in terms of mission and operational constraints, for example, or design and capabilities of the spacecraft, for example, to perform collision avoidance maneuvers, but also for the operators to be able to exchange information with a network of operators in order to have a good exchange of information when to have to do collision avoidance maneuver planning. So it's an effort, but space agencies here are trying to regulate more and more this. In Kongsberg, we have control on the entire value chain for a satellite mission. We own nanoavionics for the platforms. Also, we integrate payload and sensors, launching and ground system through Andøya Spaceport and KSAT, but also mission control and data analysis. So it's important for us to think to see sustainability as a kind of driver for the entire chain. So when we do system integration at the different segments, in a way, translating these requirements, same requirement at different segments. So how it impacts the design of the spacecraft, but also the operation of the spacecraft and other aspects. This also maps to engineering processes and for reducing the risk. And also we are actively collaborating with ESA experts to understand better these requirements and how to implement and verify them. Some few words about this mission. So it's called Arctic Ocean Surveillance Precursor Mission. It's a maritime surveillance mission sorry, this is wrong. that has been initiated by the Norwegian Space Agency and the European Space Agency, with other also stakeholders from Norway. And it is equipped with, I don't know why this is happening, but with maritime surveillance detector sensors, for example, AIS and passive RF detectors for dark vessels identification, and also a crypto unit for, okay, that's the next one then, for have basically a cryptographic link in terms of communication and data dissemination for security. These requirements, zero debris requirements, of course, have a direct and practical and concrete impact on the design. So what we have done is to understand them and translate them into actions. In particular, understanding how to make the spacecraft more robust and also able to perform all the functions to be compliant and verify these requirements in terms, for example, of reliability, passivation, disposal, collision avoidance, and also how these requirements affect the design of ground segment and the actions required to the operators, and how also to exchange information across a network, as I was mentioning, through a space surveillance service. Of course, this comes with a cost, and the cost is to basically increase the complexity of your engineering design and also the cost of the mission. Of course, if you want to have a more reliable, more robust platform, you need to increase the mass, you need to increase the cost, the power. But at the same time, that's what we discovered, through simple adjustments in the design and also on some operations compensation, we identified ways to improve and have a better and more reliable spacecraft without increasing the scope and the cost too much and significantly. And so this is a little more technical, but not too much. For being, I'm finishing. For being compliant with space debris mitigation requirement, one of the most important things is to demonstrate that your platform doesn't have, or you can kind of justify, so-called catastrophic single point of failure. So failures that will lead to complete loss of not only the mission, but also of the spacecraft. So the spacecraft becomes a brick in space, so-called. So you have to identify all these catastrophic single point of failures, and after that, you need to try to mitigate and compensate them. What we found, just with simple adjustments and design compensations, that we managed to mitigate most of these critical single point of failures. And at the end, so our spacecraft now looks more robust and less prone to become a brick in space, which is very dangerous. I think that's it for me, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marco. Very valuable, concrete case from Kongsberg. So now, please, to our last speaker, Johannes Schmid from Nord University Business School. Johannes is going to talk about the space roadmap to bridge between Arctic space activity and European policy stakeholders, and James Francis is going as well to take the floor, right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct. So thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for James for joining this talk together with me, as well as thank you to Andreas Raspotnik from the Heinrich Center for Business and Governance, and Fredrik Korpe from Innovation Norway. I think I'll go to the other side because there's so little space. So I'd like to start with a short anecdote, actually, and it goes like that. So somewhere in Bodø, estimated time of arrival, kindergarten, 8:02. I wish it was a bit earlier because I was already late. So during the morning departure to kindergarten, a stressed parent was trying to get their children into their car seat. As they were starting, to stare like surrogates or meerkats into the horizon. And I thought I'll lighten the idea up with bringing a small picture of them. But remember how they stand always, okay? A bright light had appeared and was making its way over us. No accompanying sound, and its subsequent split into two distinct light sources. My kids had spotted the SpaceX Falcon transporting Starlink satellites across European aerospace. Actual arrival at the kindergarten was recorded at 8:20, but despite the delay, the transition was positive and meaningful contributions were still made upon arrival. The kids collaborated and fun was involved. The incident supported my broader reflection. If such resources and capabilities are nowadays routinely launched from elsewhere, what about the Arctic? What about Europe? Initiatives such as IRIS² or related efforts aimed at strengthening European technological autonomy. Despite Europe's and also Nordic's delay, our trajectory remains positive, I believe. Meaningful contributions can still be made, and the Arctic and Europe can still collaborate. Fun can still be involved. So what are some thoughts behind this? Why is the time right to bring this up with the science world, I think? So here a statement that we discussed some time ago in Vienna. Europe needs to build the space economy and a certain power. Otherwise, it becomes quite challenging to promote European values on sustainability and space sustainability and quality of life, what we are good at in Europe. We simply would not have negotiation power. But things are on the way. So as an example, the EU Inc. was recently started as a concept or an idea to create a new truly European structure, not only company, but also beyond the topics. We have a unique positioning of Arctic space actors in the Arctic, the growing need for competence and infrastructure in the region, and the increasing interest from European and international space governance bodies. So what is a task? A task is to think about, okay, how to explore, how to strengthen, and how to develop the synergies between Arctic space activities and the European space governance. We have heard a lot about local innovations and regional innovations, both in Norway, but also beyond. And it's obviously a discussion that is security related. Space, drones, security. But also you have the idea of, okay, startup, scale up, that also joins the discussion. And then at the same time, you have those large-scale European projects, such as IRIS², Ariane, and Copernicus, which depend on these regional and local actors working together with the European space and security policy. At least so we believe. The High North has space innovation potential, and it's often, you know, the research goes into directions, okay, communications, situational awareness, topics like law, as we heard in the discussion before, but it's this conflict, or how to say, it's this co-joint activity of different levels, both governance, industry, research, that meet at this. It's called a kind of a. It's this ecosystem, and regional, national, and international governance players have to interact. All of a sudden, and we saw it today also with Greenland discussion, that someone from a regional ministry is now on a huge stage, and the same can happen with the space discussion. What are potential holdbacks? Well, the Arctic region has demographic challenges. Also, the investment is a challenge. Money usually flows to the centers. We have fragmented political alignment, and there is limited risk capital. So when you think about reports like Draghi report, they're quite they quite understand this challenge of fragmentation within Europe, And that is something that the region of the Arctic also has to think about, especially Norway not being part of the European Union, when thinking as an example of the vision for the European space economy, where Norway is not automatically integrated. So we have European objectives and we have regional objectives in the Arctic, but also other regions, obviously. But they are aware of the strategic capacity of Europe and the necessity to work together. Now, thank you, James, for your insight on the European perspective and how the Arctic frames in.
No, just a little bit of a quick thing looking at how international governments actually impacts the way that Norway behaves when it comes to Europe, because as you know, as Johannes had mentioned, Norway is not automatically integrated within EU frameworks and EU structures. This comes through a lot of negotiation, and then of course, that falls into integration, and that has happened a lot through different kinds of agreements. Norway mainly participates through the EEA agreement, which has allowed it to participate in systems such as EGNOS and Galileo, but also after further deliberation and discussions, they were able to join Copernicus more recently as well. Well, more recently is 10, 11 years ago, but still, they're actually becoming a lot more integrated into these larger structures. And now with discussions of IRIS², there is a lot more of Norway becoming much more integrated into the fold of the EU, as questions for autonomy and independent and sovereign data become a real question. But it shows that actually Norway is very sort of integrated within Europe, and it actually has become a lot more impacted at the way that the EU and other systems are actually developing their own systems. So these legal frameworks are very important when we discuss that in detail. So they participate in these EU programs, but they don't necessarily have the authority to vote in them when it comes to certain meetings or to discuss the direction and approach of these activities. They're more of a sort of user and participant. So that's a particular caveat to this kind of participation. Maybe quickly, next slide. And then European strategic autonomy, which is the term that we keep hearing everybody say more recently. We hear it here, we hear it in Brussels, we hear it across Europe, across different kinds of domains, but for space it's particularly pertinent. And Norway is seen as a key actor within Europe. It's one of the first nations that are always listed as being like-minded partners, including the UK and Switzerland, but Norway is usually really on the top of the list for these kinds of activities. It's mentioned in the EU strategy for space strategy for security and defense. It's mentioned in other ones that are beyond space, but there's a particular one to show that Norway is viewed as a like-minded and a very strong partner that they can rely on for even things that are a lot more, let's say, tenuous or contentious kind of activities that might be sensitive. But Norway actually still participates through a lot of other activities, through the EDF, for instance, through EU funding rounds, through active NATO and EU exercises, but they also support through actually dedicated initiatives. I mean, the Arctic Satellite Broadband mission is not an EU mission, it's not a European one, but the EU is a customer of the data that comes off of it. So from the Norwegian radiation monitor, which comes off of this kind of activity. So there is a link between them, that the EU is also actually looking to Norway for some kinds of data and support. So there is a sort of push and pull between these two actors, but there is a lot more that could be further leveraged between the two of them and from more local actors, as previously been mentioned during this presentation. So I'll pass back to you to finish it up.
Thank you so much, James, for your insights. So we heard some of the innovation and industry perspective. We heard some of the European perspective. Today we've also heard something from the science perspective. At the same time as we are meeting here, there's also a side event on Space Made Simple. It would have been extremely valuable if we can have those two groups be on the same board and discuss the same thing. So I'm very thankful also that some industry players, ISAR and Kongsberg and maybe others, are also available here in this talk and get some insights from the discussion here. But what is this thought that we have? We have different actors, stakeholders that talk these different languages. So we have the governance actors, we have the industry actors, and we have the researchers. In the research field, we also have very different perspectives. We have tech research, obviously. They unite very well with industry. And we have governance researchers, and they go more towards policy. But it's all silos. So I think to make this grow in the long run, we need to break up this silo. And that's why we propose the idea of a space tandem. I'm not a graphic designer, you will see right away, but the idea behind this is that we have many actors that have similar ideas. They understand similar challenges. They're all trying to go forward. They're all active. They're all excited. But the power goes into space. Whereas if you think about the space tandem and you align those forces, maybe you have a bit of a more, how to say, a more modern bike like this. But what we see, okay, we have lost a few actors on the way. I think that's always going to happen. They now have helmets on, so currently the security and safety discussion is in the place, which we didn't have before. But anyways, they go all into a similar direction. Their projection is aligned. And that's the idea that we want to bring forward, and that's how we need to break up those silos. So those, not always, but sometimes need to be a bit more aligned with their ideas. So what we want to do is that we learn about and create mutual benefits. We understand we need strategic funding for Arctic space activities, and we need to encourage this outside of our silos. We need to think about, okay, how to strengthen Europe's global competitiveness and autonomy. Obviously, many here are interested in promoting the Arctic as a region of innovation and cooperation, and they collaborate in global space policy and industry. And why do I think this is also quite relevant in a science session? Especially the last few years, scientists become more and more challenged within their science bubble, and they need to create impact. They need to go outside of the field in order to secure fundings. So it's those two worlds where you have to become a bit more maybe become a bit more mainstream and leave your science bubble in order to create an impact, in order to discuss with the policymakers, in order to discuss with the industry stakeholders, and so forth. And that will lead to governance, industry, and science dialogue without putting barriers for each other and without, without trying to invent something for someone else where they have the better technical capabilities without distracting them. But anyways, have this in mind to look beyond your own plate and to be able to create this together. So we want you to collaborate with us on the space tandem, and together we can build it and learn how to use it. And if we have our Arctic space tandem, we can collaborate also with other regions and consortia, preferably in Europe. So I'll be very happy for the discussion. Also, thanks again, James, for co-holding this presentation, and looking forward.
Thank you, Johannes, James. So now I would like to invite all the speakers for our panel session now. And before to move to the audience, I will of course use my privilege as a chair to start the first round of questions. Thank you. So we have like 40 minutes for our panel discussion. So I will maybe start with James and Johannes. I will have two questions that will probably complement each other. First, I would like to know, James, that how do you see the Nordic countries, players, industries, what type of role they can have within the European landscape in the space industry? Johannes, based from what James will address, I would like to know what is the largest competitive advantage of the Nordic to connect with the European space autonomy, and maybe you have identified some bottlenecks on these things. So I will maybe start with you, and then I will follow with Marco and Indrapal.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, it was mainly sort of, you know, what makes, I mean, European, like Nordic companies a bit more.
What is kind of value? What can bring the Nordic companies for the European space industry?
Well, I think what makes them quite unique is that already they're quite new. They're very much in development. Of course, there are legacy actors, like previously mentioned. You know, there's OHB, which has OHB Sweden, and then Beyond Gravity, as well as you know, Kongsberg, and going a bit more into space. But there's a lot more new actors on the scene, such as ICEYE in Finland, and then Kuva Space as well. Ovzon is a relatively young company as well. But these kinds of new companies are a bit challenging legacy actors in Europe and providing very innovative technologies. And they come from a very sort of vibrant region that promotes innovation. So, for instance, ICEYE started off really almost about 10 plus years ago at this point, and they started really looking more at glacial melt and these kinds of activities. Now they're supplying satellites to the Swedish, Finnish, and Polish defense forces. So that's a really sharp contrast and change. So they can there's a lot of very innovative technologies being developed, but what makes the Nordic space sector quite important is it's extensive ground infrastructure that supports European activities. It's through this ground infrastructure in the north of Finland and Norway and Sweden that they support satellite operations, even for Galileo and for Copernicus. And it's through the development of further ground stations, perhaps in the future, that they can support total, you know, independence and autonomy of operations and connectivity. This is what they bring. I think geography is one of them. This innovative landscape is one of them. And the fact that they're already connected a bit with Europe, they're all part of NATO now, and 3 are part of the EU, but Norway collaborates very strongly with the EU, means that there's very good room for strong cooperation between them. And it's a region, as you saw before, that has a lot of space companies that are fully leveraged. I mean, this was only for security and defense, but it could also be for other things. There's a very strong research component within the region. But I think that's what makes them quite unique to the region and could be further sort of you know, taken up upon. I think I pass that off to you then.
Yeah, I think there are several reasons, and you have mentioned a few. And I can start with one that is kind of, okay, the Arctic could be seen, but not always, could be seen as a niche where you can launch and start activities that cannot be dealt with any other place than the Arctic. But I think the discussion for European autonomy is what is interesting here. It's the Arctic provides resources for so many different aspects of what Europe is interested in, and access to space being one of them, and space being so closely connected with the geopolitical dimensions. So whenever you talk about the space activity, let us say at Underspace, almost always the geopolitical dimension comes in, drone topics come in, security topics come in. And obviously the region there has over 60 years of experience and is very close to reaching low Earth orbit, thanks also to their collaboration with ISAR. And but they also have this collaboration together with ESRINGE on more research perspective. But then what you meant, I think it was you mentioned before, solving this governance riddle on who can launch what and when are they allowed to. But I think as soon as the next stage is reached, things will become much clearer. And but currently, I think one of the main competitive advantages is to be very close on solving this bottleneck and then providing actual European mainland facilities for the whole of Europe.
It's just the spaceport debate, and I really love spaceports. But it's the EU has actually mentioned a lot the concept of access to space. I mean, it was mentioned last week a lot at the European Space Conference that DG DEFIS and the EU is going to put a lot of emphasis on access to space. And by default in the Nordic countries, it's going to be the spaceports. Now, regardless of how developed they are, it depends on, you know, a lot of the different, as we'd mentioned before, the sort of legal discussions of who can launch what and who does what. But it's by default, these two will become the prime question. Now, whether they succeed or not is a different question. And the fact that they have limited capacities mainly for polar synchronous orbits, unsynchronous orbits, what have you, and much smaller payloads will inform a bit what kind of activities in the future. But then there's questions that need to be asked about, like what kind of rocket you'll have, how developed are they for certain types of, you know, activities? Are they able to conduct the operation specifically for these kinds of launches? This will come in the future, and that's the kind of questions that need to be discussed. That's where the Arctic, at least in Europe, can also play a particular role in space.
Could I just make a very short remark
Please.
to follow up on this? I think the Arctic also, and you asked bottlenecks. One of this bottleneck, but also in whole Europe, is this history of cherry picking from governance actors. And I think in the Arctic, especially with space, if one solves that riddle there, maybe it could provide a practice example of how to increase the flow and the speed of European governance happening with the challenges that we're looking at.
Thank you. We'll have some question now for Marco. I will have one maybe very practical question, but it's because of your presentation is quite fascinating. And I would like to know if at Kongsberg, you mentioned that all the requirements that you try to cope with from the ESA regarding space debris and everything. Is there any kind of training program for engineers to take account all these new requirements in terms of engineering development and all that stuff?
Self-training, I would say.
Okay.
But also there is a strong will of ESA to help and being very available to discuss questions, doubts, and also in a way to understand that sometimes doing things by the book is not possible because real life and real engineering problem poses challenges that are difficult to solve unless you really increase the scope and the complexity of your mission. So the training, especially for this project, was we got a set of requirements applicable to the specific mission, that these requirements are standards, are based on first ISO, International for Space Standardizations, but then ESA kind of derived more stringent, even more stringent requirements considering the changes, the fast changes of the last few years and mega constellations. And these requirements are in a way relevant and slightly different for the different segments. So the efforts, and so I would say the training is to understand what's the real impact. And so if a requirement is applicable to your question, to your mission, sorry, to understand and ask questions in terms of how this is applicable and where, and how I can be compliant and verify these requirements without, again, increasing too much the difficulty and the complexity. But also ESA organizes very often, I would say pretty often, workshops that are free to join. And I personally have joined a couple of them. So I will also classify that as a training. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I move to Indrapal, and I would like to have your, maybe your view from, from India. How do you see this, how to shape this Arctic space governance from, the perspective from India, from outside of the Arctic, as a non-European? Maybe you have some inputs, some ideas about the future of governance from the Indian perspective? Has India any ambition regarding the Arctic region as well? So that would be interesting to maybe to dig a bit on this. And maybe I will have another extra questions. Because it is something very sensitive and very important when it comes to the Arctic. It's about the indigenous people. We talk about many different aspects, many stakeholders, but we didn't mention yet the indigenous people, and particularly here in Northern Europe. It's a very important issue. So do you have any maybe view on this, and how if the indigenous community may have some words of even local communities have some words on this growing infrastructure, and I can think about the Andoya airspace, which of course for the people living around may change their life. So if you have some inputs.
So on the first question, I would like to address this. India is interested in the Arctic due to the 2-3 reasons. First is we have this corridor from Chennai to Vladivostok. It's a maritime corridor which passes through the Indian Ocean and Indian and Pacific Ocean generally. So after that, from Vladivostok to all the trade which will be happening in the future in India or Europe or in the kind of Canada or US will be going through that corridor. Second thing which will be really interested for India, India is actually developing international north-south transit corridor from India to Russia, St. Petersburg. This is again a kind of maritime corridor, then it passes on the land till Russia. So that's why we'll be interested in the Arctic. And on the space kind of thing, we want to like research on the Arctic, like what is happening in the Arctic. Same thing could be applied for the that Himalayan system which we have in our own country. So this is the same kind of ecosystem which is there between India and China and here in the Arctic, which can be happening. So we'll be really interested in the research kind of part. And for the space part, we have one of the very vibrant space program in our country, that's ISRO. ISRO have put a satellite or Mangalyaan in $400 million in moon. It's the cheapest mission. It's the cheapest mission by any country. So it is less than the budget of the Gravity movie. So that's what we can look into, and we have that we have the resources also, like human resources also. We have a large population which is studying in the good universities, which could be used in those kind of the research, and we have a very vibrant research program particular to the space thing. And third thing why India would be interested, since China is saying it's in white papers that we are interested in the Arctic and we are the near Arctic state. If China is developing those kind of ports, that Soviet era ports, they are redeveloping, they are putting hotels, they are putting lodges, they are putting the maritime corridor in the Arctic. So we are also interested, because we don't want any opportunity to be missed in the future, because this is the future. This corridor, this region will be the future. And since the other point which could be why we'll be interested, we are right now 4th largest economy in the world. So kind of trade which will be happening in the West and India will be happening from those kind of area. So that's why we are really interested in the Arctic. And on the second question, I would say that on the part of the indigenous community, I think the kind of pyramid thing which is happening from seabed to space, like we are putting everything in the seabed to space and satellites. So I think in this program we should take indigenous knowledge into account, like why we are doing those kind of things, why we are putting those satellites, why we are developing those technologies. We are developing for those people only who are living in the this region, like Sami, Inuits. These people are the people who are kind of living in those kind of area. So we need to take into account the indigenous knowledge system, and we should bring them on board. Like I was hearing that there is a Sami council which is there. So there should be kind of this thing would be there. There should be dialogue should be there between the space program and the indigenous community. Then only good things can come out through these kind of programs.
Thank you. Then I think it's now time to move to the audience, if there is any questions for our speakers. So, yeah.
Thank you. Giacomo Bruni from the Peace Research Institute Oslo. I have a question for James on the first presentation. When is the report out? Because I want to read it. The real question is, I would like some methodological clarification, if you can, clarification on how you characterize the companies. So, for example, what is only defense, what is only security, what is doing both? And also if you could elaborate on the typology of these companies. You mentioned Norway or the Nordics is characteristic because there is a lot of new companies. If you could say something about like, what is the share of startups within these different countries? And this is the question.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad that you're excited for the project. I am too. So it'll probably be out, I think, likely the end of Q2 or early Q3, as we're still going through, I think, the finalization of some of the data. So let me try to make sure I get through every single point that you brought up. The main thing first for, let's say, for the company analysis is we took mainly companies, first of all, I'll just say that were traditionally, I mean, this is more of a simplistic point that I'm putting here. It'll be a lot more, it's a lot more detailed on paper, but for the sake of this discussion, we looked at more core space companies, so ones that were really developing or actively engaging in the space sector, rather than sort of miscellaneous companies. It tends to be that you see a lot in national company catalogs that they include, for instance, metallurgy companies that just cut sheet metal because you can use that for a satellite. That was not considered, for instance, a space company. It is space adjacent, but this we didn't consider in the final tally. And then when looking at security, defense, or otherwise none, we look basically in two lenses. You can have security, which involves civil security, anything that involves, for instance, search and rescue. It can involve Coast Guard, law enforcement activities, and such. And then defense is typically military, more along the lines of actually supplying data, products, assets, or anything to the military. So this is kind of how we split it up on both. And if they didn't have any public data that said, that they work with these kinds of actors, then they were typically listed as not involved. That can happen at times where they don't list their involvement, but usually they would. It supports a lot more sort of the robustness of these companies when they tend to receive sort of funding or, let's say, contracts or agreements with military actors. It tends to supply a bit of reputability to the company. So the likelihood is possible, but I would assume it's not very much, on the high side. So this is kind of how we characterized it. And then I think the second part of your question, right, was a bit more about, about startups. I mean, that is one of the things that we will extrapolate as well. For now, it depends a lot on the countries. For instance, in Denmark, it's a huge number. It's, this is off the top of my head, but I have to look at the charts a bit more, but it's upward of 40%, for instance, are very new and set up within the last 5 to 10 years. It's very similar for Finland as well, because they have a very strong cluster in Espoo, right off of Helsinki, given, the increased amount of investment by the region, as well as the university churning a lot more. In Sweden, that proportion is a bit lower because there's a lot more, as I said, traditional actors and a lot more of a robust pre-existing space community. And in Norway, it's also a bit more towards the traditional, but there are some startups coming up. But this data, I mean, will be actually in the final report as well, but it's a bit more scattered, let's say. It depends on how new their space sectors are. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have a thought on the startup topic, because I believe, also coming back to the Arctic, I think we have to treat the Arctic as a scale-up even, kind of, because also what in Europe is the problem is that startups, they make it maybe, and then they're bought or they're somewhere else. But if one takes this next step and goes into the scale-up position, and we've also discussed this earlier, then there's ground to be made, and also understanding to be made when it comes to European governance challenges, and maybe interesting things to do research on also, I believe.
Questions from the audience? Oh, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Josef Wiedemann from Isar Aerospace. Maybe to bring a few perspective from the industry side. So in our view, we need to see the whole topic more holistic. Whatever creates business, activity, jobs contributes to a vivid Arctic. We had a very similar discussion in another panel on the defense side. There is much more clear. It's not enough to only have one aspect. It all comes together. If you have people working in the Arctic, living in the Arctic, you can research more, you can defend better, and so on and so on and so on. So it's really, I think it's a good approach to see the topic as a tandem, to use your image, Johannes. But it really needs to come from the whole value chain, and it needs to be execution focused. So the end target, of course, academia will never produce a product, but it should be more focused towards the later results and execution. This would really benefit the whole value chain. Of course, us as a company, we could then hire directly these people. We can have projects together, just to give you an example. So it really, it comes all together. So on the governance side, the governance should focus most and foremost in enabling all these activities. From academia, from industry, from whatever players they are, to really encourage activities in the Arctic as a whole.
Actually, I have a small point on that, which is quite interesting. A lot of these kinds of, this is only really the second time I've really been to one of these more Arctic-focused or, sessions in the region. But a topic that comes up a lot is the concept of human security and economy, which I think sort of alludes to what you're trying to say. And I think that the space sector provides a very unique and very interesting kind of industry that would lure a lot of people here. We also did similarly a study on talent and youth in the space sector, where we surveyed, upward of 500 young individuals and professionals in the space sector, and it showed that 96% of them joined it because of inspiration alone, or that is the reason they want to join space. So if you want to ensure, really good young people and secure sort of, let's say, human capital, I mean, space is a really strong inspirator. And upward of already people who want to work in space and work in space, more than half, I mean, up to about 2/3 even said that they'd be willing to move for a job in space. So, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked to see, I don't know the statistics, but how much Andøya Space actually employs in the region is probably a strong reason for why, they are luring in a lot of people, and there is a lot of room for more of that in the region.
Thank you. Yeah,
May I comment one more time? So it's super interesting, maybe to elaborate a little bit on the thought. We're really in this transformation. So space is super inspirational. It's attracting people. But right now what's happening, at least within Europe, we really transform from an exploration, inspiration-driven ecosystem towards an infrastructure topic, towards an industrial topic, towards a defense-related topic. So it becomes more and more interlinked in our daily lives, and it gets much beyond an institutional-driven science project, for the sake of example, I excuse my words. And this thought gives us much bigger opportunities, because it gives the economy, the business perspective to all of it. And then people, they can join for science, join for inspiration, but they can grow. They can grow the whole business, the whole infrastructure, and there's a real demand for that. So there's much more existing already, like excuse me to use so much the defense example because it's more obvious. If you want to look at the Arctic, if you want to launch things in the Arctic, it's self-explanatory, but also for business. We all use also in the Arctic our mobile phones with GPS, with Galileo, to navigate here. So it's really, there's a huge demand, Earth observation, and so on and so on. I just gave a few examples. It's in day-to-day lives, and we need to understand that this is not only in the Arctic, but also in the Arctic. And then it becomes just a starting point of something growing beyond just science and institutional funded projects.
If I could also follow up on this and something James and I, we had a very interesting discussion in the morning about this holistic perspective also, where particularly also the industry stakeholders, and I do include you because I think you're very soon there, and I very much include you, that you also have this push-pull power when it comes to discussion with the governance. I'm not talking like what do you call this non-conform lobbying that has a bad image and everything, but it's more to push-pull with the ideas and also breaking up this fragmentation on the national levels when it comes to governance and their own perspectives and cherry picking, as I mentioned it before. So I think that the industry players, you can play with this type of, okay, the space is hot, is interesting, plus you're in a position where people are coming towards you rather than you have to search them on the governance level. And I think that's something where you have a strong power, but just need the right, the right vehicle or frame to become more active on that.
Yeah, maybe Marco, if you want to react on the discussion.
Yeah, definitely good point. I believe that as I forgot your name, sorry, Joseph, from Meister pointed out, there is a shift of, let's say, the main driver of, let's say, space industry activities and development, which is great because that makes, let's say, ideas real in a way. So the realization of projects, because this strong interest and, let's say, also a more urgent need is becoming more and more possible, and that also kind of opened the audience in a way of people that can work in the industry. I personally, I can give my personal experience. I decided to do a bachelor, master, and PhD in space engineering because of the more of the space exploration side and the scientific side. And I believe that should still be one of the main motivator behind the passion, because at the end, this job is very beautiful and is very inspiring, because can also, in a way, solve problems that are not kind of more Earth-based problems, but protecting the entire planet, not only between countries, right? We might need the planetary defense. We might need exploration for new resources. Now, I don't want to steer away too much from the question, but my point being is that I think we need a balance between the need that comes with a lot of opportunities, but also the fact that people comes to the space sector also because that's, in a way, a very authentic passion and interest. So, and I work in a defense company, so it's, but I believe that this is also still kind of something that motivates me every day to do my job well.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? No? So maybe I will have my last question for all of you. So I will maybe if you have one idea, one concept, one thing, one thought about how to make a success in a way, if you have a recipe, an idea about how to concretely to shape this Arctic space governance, how we can succeed despite all the bottlenecks, despite all the context. If you have everyone each of you one idea, thoughts about it. So you have the floor for the conclusion. Then
I can start.
who won? Yeah.
Well, I think collaboration is one of the best opportunity in a way that we have. In particular, Norway is a small country, so but with a strong willingness to do more and more in space to protect, in particular, the Arctic. So I think competition is a good thing to have, but also we should try to collaborate and open collaboration between countries that kind of share same visions and values. And from technological perspective, this can be a way of making better systems for Arctic surveillance, for example.
Yeah, I think I'll follow up on what you said, and thinking back on the space tandem idea, which relies a lot on collaboration. But I think it's also this industry perspective and governance, not to understand each other as sort of players that can create breaks for each other, but more that now has been the time. Now is the time for them to actually sit down on the table and do and create together, understanding that each one of the actors has their own silo thinking and is a specialist in one area. But particularly, and since it's a science session again, inviting every scientist to dare to go to those other cocktail parties, as it's often called in the science world. And okay, you might not understand everything, but I think your message will be extremely valuable if you present it with the timing that is right, and I think the timing is right. So yeah.
So I'll say this thing will be successful by actually there should be collaboration, but what the thing which is lacking in the Arctic is there is no kind of treaty which Antarctic have. That's another South Pole. That Antarctic Treaty was signed in 1959. So there are rules in the Arctic. There are framework, but not the kind of framework or not the kind of rules which are in the. I don't want to like superimpose the same rule in the Arctic, but the kind of treaty which Antarctic have should be here, and these actors should be sit and should frame a kind of treaty and like playing rules. Like there should be rules should be there, and there should be government, there should be infrastructure which should be coming through a coherence treaty which is there in the Antarctic, and same framework could be used in the Arctic also.
I think what I'll say is probably I say it more from myself, from my reflections I think that we've had today across different sessions today of what we've discussed, is that as well the Arctic is a very unique region, and it's very important to a variety of stakeholders and actors. But there's, I think, two main things here that we can take away. Is firstly, as I speak mainly for the European kind of Arctic, we have very shared values, I think, across most of us in space. We have very shared values for capabilities, for governance, for policy, concept of moral and ethical use of space. I mean, we didn't discuss that, but they're quite shared across the three countries including Denmark through Greenland. I mean, we have a lot of shared values, so there is definitely room there for more discussion and dialogue on this sense. And also the second one is linking a bit back to the work with Johannes and then the space roadmap, is that the Arctic focuses a lot on the local, which is natural. Of course it does, because there's a lot of different stakeholders that are unique to the region. But if you want this region to be more, I think, effectively folded into sort of, a globalizing world, it needs to be also scaled up to the European level. They will not be able to understand the uniqueness of this region if they don't also, there is no bridge between both, because it's now no longer a point of just, local communities, local actors alone. Now they have to be integrated in a bigger system, but that doesn't mean they can't lose their own autonomous, activities and their own sort of agency. but it does need to be scaled up for wider collaboration with neighboring countries in the Nordics and perhaps with Europe more broadly as well. So I think that's something that hasn't been perhaps enough elaborated on yet. That's for the future, perhaps.
Thank you. So thank you so much for your presentation inputs. Thank you, the audience, for your questions. So I will close our session, and please give applause for our speakers.